Finally, just to go over a few of the potential benefits and risks, I think the proposed framework, as I've described here, aligns with the provincial approach very well, and that is certainly a benefit in terms of buy-in provincially. I also think that both at the provincial and federal environmental assessment office assessment office work, both the federal and provincial processes require consideration of cumulative effects, and certainly the province is reviewing the way they are addressing cumulative effects. They just had a paper come out just, I think, last week on making that a lot clearer and more transparent about how they're doing that. And there's some additional policy that's been coming out of the Federal Environmental Assessment Office. So this is a very active area, but I think that this approach stays well within the way they're addressing cumulative effects, although I think we're taking a much more operational view in this than they are. I think that the way this is sketched out is technically feasible. We don't have all the information we need, but it's fairly easy to scale that approach as better information becomes available. I think there's certainly the opportunity to improve transparency in decision making, and that's by taking away this trade-off model at the decision stage and putting it more at the objective stage. And the efficiency gains really come from making publicly available the indicators, the objectives, and the assessment of current condition, because then proponents can look at those and say, okay, I understand what you want to manage to. I can make my proposal meet those criteria and those requirements. And if you do that, government gets better proposals. And if they do that, then they're easier to adjudicate. There's less back and forth with proponents, and ultimately less remedial action that needs to be taken. And I think there's no doubt that that can lead to better outcomes, even if we don't move at all beyond what's currently baked into regulation and policy. I think there's still clearly an opportunity here to have better ecological, social, and economic outcomes. Now, it's not all a bed of roses here. There are certainly some risks. And the first thing is that if this is going to work, it's going to require some alignment of regulation and policy across sectors. We can't have everybody managing to different lines in the sand. That won't work. So there's going to need to be some sort of reform, at least at a policy level, and likely at a regulatory level. And that's complex because we've got multiple agencies and multiple governments with some overlapping jurisdictions. So that's a very difficult piece. And what we're doing it's a challenge on the provincial side too. And what we're trying to do now is understand what is possible within the current regulatory and policy environment, and then how we could make recommendations for changes in regulation and legislation, etc. It's also not clear what is going to be the process to establish new objectives. So there could be certainly important indicators and values that are identified for which there are no existing objectives, and communities would like to see some objectives established for those. How do we get those into regulation and policy, or somehow under management influence, whatever the future emerging management model looks like? So that we need some clarity on that. Capacity is always an issue. There's going to be resources that are required to implement this and to understand how things are changing over time to give the raw data that's required to actually do the assessments. And the last thing is that we really need to manage people's expectations. This is not going to solve everyone's problems. I've heard the term cumulative effects attached to just about every issue, and a lot of issues, even though they're important, are not necessarily cumulative effects issues. And we really need to manage expectations around what we can do through the implementation of a framework like this, and what problems are going to be outstanding and how those are going to be addressed. And just because they're not addressed through this does not mean they're not valid and important. So that brings me to the end of my presentation, and I'd like to thank you for taking the time to watch it, and I hope you can provide some feedback for us to help us improve the framework and the report when it is released, I hope in the fall of 2013. Thanks very much.